Testing 1 2. Hello. You're rocking with the best, the Holy Ruckus podcast, episode number 94. Thanks so much for being with us on this special Saturday afternoon. If you're watching this in the afternoon, Eastern time. And I got special guests with me today. Jill and Dr. Jesus Berard is going to be with us. We're talking SOS Cuba, the situation that is happening in Cuba right now, and why we should know about it as Catholics. What's the real? What do we get from our perspective? What can we do now, here and now? But the one thing we can do, if you haven't already done so, I want you to pray. I want you to pray for the situation because the situation in Cuba, as you're going to find out, and if you haven't already, just hashtag SOS Cuba or hashtag Cuba Libre, and you'll start seeing some of the stuff that's coming out, because it's a pretty dire situation, and we're going to shed light on that. And so thanks so much for rocking with us and being with us. Let me know right now in the comments where you're coming from. Say hello. We're going to have these guests on, and this is going to be on YouTube and Facebook, as well as all our audio platforms on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify for sure. But again, thanks so much for rocking with us. You guys are awesome. And here we go. Here's that intro.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
Let's bring the ruckus.
Why were you made? I was made to be happy. The way to be happy is to know truth and to love goodness. In other words, I am made for God.
Pero quiero lío en las dioses. Quiero que se salga afuera.
You are now listening to the Holy Ruckus podcast.
All right. Hello. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Holy Ruckus podcast. We got Jill and Dr. Jesus Manuel Berard. Say that 3 times fast. What's going on, guys?
I can't even do that.
No, for sure. How's everybody doing?
Doing great.
It's good. Yeah, doing good.
Awesome. Let's go around. Let's start with the lady. Jill, introduce yourself, where you're calling from. I know it's a little different time, but go for it.
Yeah, so I'm Jill Miller. I live in Hamilton, New Zealand. So on the other side of the world, kind of ish. It is currently Sunday at 7:15 a.m. So I'm a day ahead, calling from the future.
There you go. That's always the coolest part. Every time, like, this is the second time we've had Jill on, and I was like,
You guys are always living in the past, bro.
Seriously. And we're about to find out just how much we're living in the past with this podcast. It's super thematic. I love it. All right, go ahead. The doctor, go for it.
And not only that, but New Zealand is like in the dead of winter right now, right? Isn't that?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Ooh. Yeah. All right. Yeah. My daughter was in Chile for a whole year teaching, so we had to get used to that whole notion. Very strange.
It's very weird to have like barbecues at Christmas.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Go
All right. So I'm a colleague of Josh's at St. Vincent Pallotti High School. And Josh, a while ago, last term, asked me to speak to his religion classes about religious practice in Cuba. And I think I shocked the heck out of the students with all this stuff about Santeria, which actually I think kind of ties into what's going on in a way. It ties into what's going on in Cuba. That's why I said, when we were talking before the show, that the situation in Cuba is like, it's simple, but it's also complicated,
Right.
So
No, and yes, it was shocking and dramatic, Dr. Manny, but you know what? It struck such a chord that I was like, I gotta have him back again. More about how crazy.
I would have brought a chicken and done a sacrifice in front of you,
Exactly.
If it's anything that we Cubans know how to do is make an entrance, okay?
There you go. So I'm so excited. So yes. So again, thanks so much for being here and dedicating your time to this 45 minutes to an hour that we have. But I wanted to, and again, and I know I have no skin in the game. I'm a fellow human, right? and that's it. I'm Catholic. What's your skin in the game in regards to like why Cuba? Why are we talking about this? Why is this something that struck a chord with you, Jill, and Dr. Manny?
For me, I am actually first generation American. Both sets of grandparents of mine came from Cuba.
Okay.
So my mother's grandparents came over early when there was unsettled, like an unsettled kind of political thing with Batista, who was before Castro. They lived by the university, and things were quite just not good, very stressed. And so my grandmother's brother, who was living in Miami, said, come to Miami, waited out here, and they came and never went back. And then my grandparents on my father's side came to Cuba in 1960. 1960, at the end of 1960. So after Castro took over.
Yep.
So this is very close, obviously, to my family. It's very personal, and I think people forget sometimes that for us Cubans, it's not just a social study. This is our family. This is our people, and so it's very, very close to our heart, and very sometimes very emotional. It takes a lot of emotional investment, and probably the last 2 weeks now. It's been quite an emotional roller coaster, I think, of things, because you feel all the things. So yeah, that's me.
Do you have any family there now or presently? Sorry if I missed that.
Extended family, which I think for a lot of Cubans kind of whose family have been here for a while, that's probably the case. It's extended family. My mother's side of the family is very big. My grandfather was one of 18, so big Catholic family. So a lot of extended family there, and a lot of the family that obviously I knew, like some of their siblings and stuff have since passed. But yeah.
Got you. Go ahead, Dr. Manny.
Well, let's see. Where do I begin? I was born there, and I was born actually a month and a half before Castro took power. So even though I was rather young, I came to the United States in 1961. Actually, it was 62. I was still 3 years old though. But I grew up hearing all kinds of stories about what had happened in Cuba. Certainly witnessed the gradual exodus of my family. My father was the first one to leave. He was a commercial fisherman, and his fishing boat was stolen by a political fugitive and taken to Key West. And so my father had contacts in customs, because his brother and his father had worked in customs. So using his connections, he actually obtained permission from the Castro government to go get his boat back. And of course, the minute he stepped on American soil, he sold the boat, and that was the beginning of a long journey in a new homeland for our family. He was able to get my mother out about a year later, and then about a year or so after that, my grandmother and myself, and then you know how Cuban families are, that 3 generations living together that's the norm, right? I mean, I think that's true, Josh, of all Hispanic families, right? So then my grandfather and my great grandfather from Spain, and he was a problem because he was a Spanish citizen. He was sort of like a Cuban, but he was also a Spanish subject. And so the laws regarding immigration into the United States regarding Spaniards were different than they were for Cuban refugees. And so anyway, so my father was able to finagle an exit visa for him, and my great grandfather didn't want to leave his new country land, and so basically to make a long story short, the opportunity expired, and then other means were found, and my grandfather and great grandfather actually wound up going through several Latin American countries while my dad was like negotiating to get him another visa to get into the country. So so we were all split up for for a good amount of time. I do remember a very emotional scene at the airport in Havana as my grandfather was handing me to my grandmother, not knowing if he was ever going to see his wife or his grandchild or his daughter, who was already in the United States again. And this was a very typical story of exilees back then. And I suppose we can say that we were lucky then, because at the time Castro wanted to get rid of us. There was that famous speech that he gave, is no los necesitamos, we don't need them, right? And then he called us gusanos, worms, right? You know all that, Joe. And so we still had the opportunity to get out. It just had to be with the proper channels. After that, the doors started closing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So even though you just gave us, very, very much like a teacher, Mr. Berard, let's set the stage again one more time, a little bit more of a primer, right? Because I'm that slow, I'm that hard headed. I need that one more time, that Wikipedia summary, right? Just kind of bring it down like first, and as to why we're talking about. So you that are listening, or you that are watching, right? You're coming into this cold, right? Well, why is this a topic for the Holy Ruckus, right? Well, because we are the body of Christ, right? The Cubans that are dealing with this now, like, we are Catholic, we are universal. So, and anytime we see, just like the great, the late great Dr. King said, right, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So,
Right.
even though it's not, right here, I mean, it's in our backyard. It's we have to care. Right? This needs to be something. And so, bringing in folks that have some skin in the game, that's important. But also to understand that this is a real problem. Communism and totalitarian governments and regimes are still active in the world today, and we need to see that for what it is from this perspective. And so if I can give a platform to that, that's what we're going to do. So that's what the Holy Ruckus is doing today. So again, thanks so much for listening and watching. And so here we go. But Dr. Berard, here's that first point. How did we get here? How did we get to this point? What's going on in Cuba right now? Because I mean, if you were like me, maybe a year ago, I was like, what? Cuba's still dealing with this? Like, what's going on? I thought y'all were free. I thought he was gone. But the tyranny exists. What's going on?
It does, but it's not the same that it was under Fidel, I have to say. What happened with Cuban communism, it actually became Fidelism, it was the cult of the personality. Fidel became sort of like the patriarch of the country, and so so while he was still in power, he had absolute control, the way that Stalin had control with the iron fist in Russia, and so after Fidel got old, he passed at least for appearances, he passed control over to his brother Raul for a couple of years, right before he died. Fidel was still sort of like the Wizard of Oz. He was the guy that was like operating everything from behind the curtain, But Raul wasn't quite as hard-nosed as Fidel. I mean, these guys are all terrible. Let's not get that wrong, right? They're just awful. But there are different degrees of evil. There are different degrees of awfulness. And Raul was just a little bit more lenient than Fidel was. I think Fidel was very jealous of his own power, and he had to maintain absolute rule. But anyway, so now we have another guy, right? We have Diaz-Canel. We have a new president groomed by Raul. Raul has stepped down. We have this new guy that's running the country. He's not a Castro. He's not a Castro. He's not a Castro in the sense that he has that cult of personality behind him, right, controlling the country. I think the Cuban people are recognizing that. They're recognizing that this is not the same brand of Cuban communism, hardcore Cuban communism that they've been used to for the past 60 years, that things are, not quite as strong-armed as they were before. That's not to say that they're not strong-armed. I mean, after all, the people that are protesting, how many of them supposedly have disappeared, right? Hundreds have been arrested. people. I mean, when I was in Cuba a couple of years ago, actually this time 2 years ago, I was in Cuba. I had the opportunity to talk with people, and in Cuba, you get 20 years in prison for anything, any infraction. You're at the mercy of the system. You're at the mercy of the magistrate, and so it's a known thing that just people disappear, never to be seen again. This is not it's not isolated to Cuba. This happens in other countries as well, right? So anyway, so I don't know. What do you want to know? Why are the people protesting suddenly? Because obviously they are they're so fed up. Even though these are people, remember that these are people that actually grew up under the communist system, right? Okay. There are no like old school. Well, I suppose there might be some people. Yeah, there'll be old people that are still alive that were alive before Castro took power, but they never got out of Cuba. They had to accept circumstances for what they were. And then you have the successive couple of generations after them that grew up under the system, were indoctrinated under the system. Everywhere you go in Cuba, just shut me up when I
I will. No, you're good. You're good.
Everywhere you go in Cuba, there's propaganda. It's on the walls of buildings. It's on the walls of houses. There are signs everywhere, big posters, right? You go to the Revolution Plaza, and there are big icons of Che Guevara, right? And all the heroes of the revolution, and it's everywhere. And the slogans are everywhere, right? So these are generations that have grown up under the new system, and yet now they're fed up because life has not improved for them in 60 years.
And then I wanted to, because this goes into what I wanted to ask Jill, so now with what we're seeing and how it's caught our attention, or at least my attention, on social media and stuff, what recently had happened? Was it COVID that really the straw that broke the camel's back for another reign of protest, or onslaught of protest? What has just happened that brings us to where we are now in 2021? Obviously, they're always disgruntled and distraught and without hope, but something just happened that may have made it even worse or untenable.
Yeah, so I think COVID definitely expedited the frustration, right? And where the Cuban people are at now. COVID, the fact that people are going hungry and starving. And what's interesting is that, as Manuel was saying, is that these are people that have been indoctrinated for the most part their whole life, right? And 60 years of propaganda, right? But they recognize what is actually to blame there, and that the cause of it's not just COVID, it's not just they're going hungry, that this is actually all at the hands of the government, and they're knowing full well the consequences of what could happen to them and probably will, and what we see happening to the Cuban people and the voices that are speaking out, that they're deciding to speak out against that and to protest in the midst of that. And so I think that when we look at what's happening in Cuba, we have to recognize the risk and the situation of what Cubans are going out into the streets and doing.
All right. Dr. Manny, how about you for 2021? Was it that COVID that kind of expedited this, as Jill was saying, or was something else that we're not seeing?
I think COVID was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you from my experience 2 years ago there that the people were very, very hopeful under the Obama administration because Obama had opened up channels of communication with the Cuban government. All of that, we all know that diplomatic relations were in better shape. Tourism was allowed, right? All those big tourist, cruise ships that are docked in Miami were allowed to go to Havana, and so these tourist dollars were coming in. The government, and this is what I meant to say about the government, how the government has somewhat relaxed in recent years, is that the government has allowed people to open up like little, like kitchens, like little restaurants in their living rooms, so they can cook for tourists, and tourists can come in and have like a home cooked, authentic Cuban meal. And they might have like maybe 4 tables and chairs in what was their living room. And then they were able to make a little bit of money doing that. This was not possible earlier on, right? So there were these cab drivers, for example, were making, I don't want to say a decent income, but they were certainly making some money from the tourist trade, right? So there was a great deal of hopefulness on the part of the people. And then a new administration came in, and then when I was there, fortunately we were still allowed to go visit, but the cruise ships were gone. The cruise ships were no longer allowed. Havana's harbor was empty. It was a ghost town, and the people were starting to suffer again economically. All right, so they depended on this tourism. The main thing, however, that Cubans depend on, believe it or not, is something called remittances, right? Which is basically money that their families in the States can send them legally through Western Union, and you have no idea how many families have been existing, barely existing, but existing, based on $100 a month that they might be getting from their families in the United States. And that was cut off, so these are the things that have really, I think, caused the situation to boil over in Cuba, is the economic oppression, the lack of assistance by the government, and then on top of that, the COVID crisis, which has overwhelmed the hospitals, the medical system, and the fact that there are no vaccines to be distributed.
Right.
So it's a perfect storm. There's a reason, folks, why this has not happened in 60 years, that the people have taken to the streets. If they had done this before under the Castro regime, they would have been shot in the streets,
Mm-hmm. And what did you guys think of, and then we can go around and starting with Joe, with this happening and with you guys being so closely related to it and intimately, like your hearts are in the game and it hurts. What was it like to see kind of the reaction or maybe lack of reaction out there, either online, in social circles, obviously social media, and then in TV and media and stuff? Like, are they covering it enough? What do you guys think, and how interesting was it to see how people tried to co-opt kind of the struggle and use it for their own mission or their own side piece? And we're gonna throw out names later, but that I thought was so interesting, how people could try to take something and take someone's pain, and we see it in other places politically, or when things like when the death of George Floyd happens, or when things happen with immigration, and how people take something that is purely like a struggle, and there is depravity there is that poverty there is that pain there, and they taken it and weaponized it for their own gain. I'm seeing the same thing with what's going on in the coverage of Cuba. What are you guys seeing? What was the reaction to the reaction for you guys, Jill?
I think we've seen a lot of people's true colors, to be honest. For me, as somebody who's never been to Cuba, it's quite an interesting feeling, because you grow up hearing about it. You grow up, and we should also say that Cuba was not a third world country before Castro took over. Cuba was very wealthy. The tourism, there was a lot of great exports. So it's the lead exporter of sugar. It was fourth among Latin American countries in literacy. It was flourishing a lot, I should say. And so I think that people like to think that, Castro came in and saved Cuba, right, and made it better and all these things. But they don't really know that Cuba was as prosperous as it was. So as a child of Cuban immigrants, you grow up hearing about what happens in Cuba. It's not been a surprise for anybody who's Cuban to know what's happening and for any of this to come out. Whereas I feel like with a lot of people in America, that's different. People that thought Cuba was out of this, or, that it was getting better, or just ignorant of things. And so it's been quite interesting. It's been quite emotional. I was very surprised at how deeply I felt and was moved by the fight of my people there. Seeing them fighting in the streets I think it made me recognize how deeply woven that is within who I am. And so when Cuba's trendy now, like it has been trendy. People like going there. They like, traveling for art or educational reasons, because that's why they can go there. Cuban culture is kind of trendy among people. We see, famous people all the time talk about going and visiting Cuba. And then the silence, right? Like kind of when things hit the fan, there's silence, and it's frustrating.
Right. Why is that? Why do you think that was a kind of an orchestrated silence of wait, we shouldn't talk about it? Like why do you think that is?
I think for some, not everybody. I don't want to put everybody into the same basket. But I think for some, to speak out against it or against the Cuban regime is to, they would have to forfeit and condemn some of their ideologies and say that things don't work and that communism and socialism don't work. It's great on paper. It's great in an ideal world. However, it doesn't work. And I think that we've seen that from organizations like Black Lives Matter, right? That those socialist, communist, Marxist ideals are held by the founders, which is no secret, and they've been quite open about it. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's been deflected to America's problem, right? And then it's been weaponized, and that's how it's been weaponized. So we're the bad people, right? We're the reason why Cuba's suffering, with a complete ignorance and unwillingness to call out the things that are completely out of the realm of the embargo, right? And I think, as a Cuban American, I'll say the embargo has failed. It has failed to do what it set out to do, right? And I don't think there's a lot of Cubans that will argue with that. But we can't just say that's the reason. Hey,
there you go. Dr. Manny, what did you think of the reaction of what was going down and people using it or not using it or not covering it? What did you think?
Well, are you talking about among the Cuban population, the Cuban American population?
Us at home. But
the Cuban Americans at home,
right? Or no, not even just people on the outside.
Well, everybody, of course, everybody uses it uses critical situations as a way to to put forward their own propaganda, right? But speaking of that, I mean, there are basically two Cuban mentalities here, right? I know plenty of like really hardcore Miami Cubans that throughout the entire history of the Castro regime in Cuba have maintained a scorched earth stance that that embargo. The only way to deal with commies, the only good commie is a dead commie, and the only way to deal with communism is to just keep hammering them with the embargo and all of this kind of stuff. But the reality is 60 years of embargo has done nothing but punish the Cuban people. And I think the world has to recognize there's also two Cubas, right? You have the regime, you have the government, you have everyone that's associated with the government, but you have those that are running the country, And then you have the rest of the population. You have the common people, right? And so the embargo has not hurt the people that are running the country. The embargo has always hurt it's a trickle down theory that the embargo has always hurt, the lowest common denominator, the average Cuban. And this is something that I think they're beginning to see. One of the best ways to control a population is to control information, and if you keep the Cuban people in the dark, if you like, up until recently, the Cuban people couldn't be on, couldn't go on the internet. They couldn't find out what was happening in the rest of the world. They couldn't find out what was happening in our country, So, and there's a lot of talk recently about the fact that the Cuban government has been trying to control the internet. They've been cutting internet service and so on and so forth. I think what has happened is that under the Obama administration, happened to be under the Obama administration, when the Cubans got a taste of American tourism dollars, when they got to mingle a little bit with American visitors, they got a sense that capitalists are not the great Satan, as imperfect as capitalism is, okay? But that capitalism and free trade is something that that they've been missing for the past 60 years. Jill was talking about the Cuban economy. The Cuban economy was great before Castro took power. The Cuban peso and the American dollar were literally traded equally. They had equal value, and you can go at any store and pay either with the Cuban peso or an American dollar. They were worth exactly the same, But there were downsides to that. I don't know if you ever, if you want to get into that in the conversation later, but yeah. So you have two different ways of looking at this. You have, Cuban Americans that are saying that we still have to, now's the time to really put the squeeze on Cuba, that it's, that the Cuban people are about to revolt, that they can't take it anymore. Let's continue the embargo. Let's even, squeeze even harder. And eventually we're going to force the hand of the Cuban people. The problem is, what are the Cuban people going to do if they haven't staged a counter revolution since the failed attempt at the Bay of Pigs, right? They can't do it on their own. They need help. Cuban people can't. They can't revolt. What are they going to fight with? Machetes, right? And shovels? Is that what they're going to use against guns and machine guns and all of that? So they need help. They need assistance. And it's not the first time in the history of Cuba that that they've needed this assistance. But anyway, I guess I'm going off in a different direction.
No, it's always welcomed, always welcome. But yeah, I wanted to bring it up to Jill, because Jill recently, in a moment of great reflection, and I'm sure the fruit of a lot of prayer and struggle, you posted something on your own Instagram that I kind of wanted to harken back to, and it kind of goes in with what Dr. Manny was kind of concluding with, was what could happen or what won't happen in regards to why the rest of the world kind of wants to see Cuba stay communist. Could you talk a little bit about that? Why it needs to be communist and why it's going to be really hard to bring this down?
Yeah, well, I mean, other countries such as Russia and Iran and have vested interests in North Korea as well, have vested interests in Cuba. Russia came out at the beginning of all this and said, if America intervenes, then we'll have to deal with the Russians as well. So it is, like Manuel said earlier, it's very complicated. It's very complex. It's simple, but it's complicated, right? There's a lot, I think, at stake for the Cuban people, obviously, but also for us and the free world, for communism in general. And, Cuba's always put out there as a poster child for communism, for communism working, the literacy rates are great. There's free healthcare. There's all these things, right? And so it's put out there as this model of success, almost, I think, among communist empathizers,
Hmm.
and sympathizers, and Cuba's location to America, I think, also gives a bit of strategy there. And we've seen that in the past, right? We've seen that with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, 90 miles from land in America, there are, nuclear missiles pointed towards America. So, I mean, I think to not acknowledge those things would be very naive for us to not acknowledge those things. And so I think sometimes because it's complicated, we would rather do nothing, it's not, even with remittances of what Manuel was saying earlier, like that all goes to the government, and then the government takes a cut of it and then takes the US dollars for themselves and then gives the people essentially kind of a worthless currency,
Right.
So it's not something that we can just throw our money at. That's something that we in the Western world are very accustomed to doing. There's always a cause that we can donate to, and I'm not saying that's bad, but that's how we kind of rally and show support. And then it's like, cool, if I've donated to this, or money can fix things. And what we see in Cuba is that that's not always the case. Sure, that alleviates some of the symptoms of what's going on, and surely makes our families back on the island, makes life a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, they're still living in under the regime of a government that doesn't let them think differently than the government. That, if you play a song or wear certain clothes or do anything that apparently goes against the dictatorship, you're thrown in jail, you're blacklisted. You don't get, there's stories of people who, because they spoke out or seemingly did something against the dictatorship, they're blacklisted. They don't get rations from the Cuban government for food. They depend on the generosity of the community around them, of people that aren't getting a lot to begin with, to sustain them, or families that have to go through 50 million different channels, send money to Spain, then they send money to Argentina, and then it goes to Cuba, that's life and the reality of the Cuban people and the Cuban Americans that are trying to support their families back home.
Right.
Manuel, any reaction to that?
Jeez. Well, there's no freedom of speech in Cuba. You can't speak freely against the government. Anyone that actually had any criticism of the government that I spoke to did it in secrecy, and only out of frustration. And you can hear the frustration in that person's voice, that they actually had somebody listening that was sympathetic to what they were feeling. And this is the only reason that they spoke with me, because they felt that that they could confide in me, and and then my family was also with me. Thank God for JP2. After he visited Cuba, he managed to convince Castro to relax a little bit on the issue of religious freedom in Cuba. The only religious freedom that was actually allowed before that was actually the practice of Santeria. And that was simply for the purposes of, well, that is a complicated thing, but I think, I touched upon that, Josh, when I spoke to your classes.
Go for it a little bit if you want, but yeah, if it's a bigger thing,
Yeah. Well, because, because the population of Cubans that are of African descent is so large that, and then of course Santeria comes out of the Yoruba religion and the worshiping of their orishas, which then were equated with Catholic saints and so on and so. So there's like this confusion, this conflation. That's another thing that that Cubans need to sort of like open their eyes about. Since this is a Catholic show, they really sort of need to see the light that Santeria and Catholicism are not compatible, no matter how hard they try, right? But so there's all of that stuff that has been going on. So that was religious freedom, was the practice of Santeria, because most of the population was into that already, and it was a way of appeasing them, right? Catholicism, old Spanish Catholicism, was the stuff that was actually banned.
Right.
Up until recently, because I actually attended a mass in Cuba that was done openly and it was done freely. So it's another example, believe it or not, of another chink in the armor, is that over the years there have been sort of like these little, things, these, maybe, I don't know if you might call them like these little crumbs that have been thrown to the people, right? But it's not enough, because they just don't have the economic means. They can't survive. When I visited someone's home, if they actually had a toilet bowl, that was a big thing. And if they had a toilet, most of the time there was like, what, a seat for the toilet? No. That's an ultra luxury. Nobody has one of those. Having a toilet is a luxury. Having running water is a luxury. All these things that we take for granted in our country are amazing luxuries to the Cuban people. No wonder the government wants to make sure that they really don't open their eyes to what is possible, what is possible 90 miles from their shores, that their American cousins have. Anyway.
Right. No, and you said it, and I'm glad we kind of went there, because that's where this latter part is kind of going in terms of what can Catholics do, those that are listening, those that are watching, right? Short of praying and to get educated. So again, I hope we've laid out, and I think beautifully, this is my top favorite episode in terms of getting people to talk about this, because it's just like so important. But also, what does the church say about communism and socialism and why it's incompatible, right? And this is what the church says, right? In Catechism 2425. Big nerd on the Catechism. Jill knows, as we went to school together as well. You have to do a catechism exam and the whole thing. But turn your catechisms to 2425. The church has rejected the totalitarian and atheistic ideologies associated in modern times with communism or socialism. She has likewise refused to accept in the practice of capitalism, individualism, and the absolute primacy of the law of the marketplace over human labor. Regulating the economy solely by centralizing planning perverts the basis of social bonds. Regulating it solely by the law of the marketplace fails social justice, for there are many human needs which cannot be satisfied by the market, right? And it should be condemned. It doesn't allow for the common good. No one is truly free. We are not meant to flourish under communism, and that's what we've seen. Luxuries that we take for granted in America, in first world problems, and all these things that we joke about. These are things that are dreams, pipe dreams for people in Cuba, and we're hearing them from secondhand, but also from people that have actually lived it. And you hear those stories again. Hashtag SOS Cuba, Cuba Libre, to find out what else is going on, because honestly, we gotta, we talk about, and I hate it, like we say, like, stay woke, but honestly, like in this case, please do, but also, when you're done clutching your pearls and your rosaries, once you've prayed, then what? Highlight other voices, right? Find people that have this going on, because again, the church has spoken out about this, has spoken out against it. The fact that JP2, as Manuel talked about, met with Castro and tried to, lessen the blow a little bit as best he could, right? Is huge, and especially what he did in Poland. Like, there's so much that the church has done in a history, but it makes I'm glad to hear, at least in your last visit, Manuel, that things were getting better from the Catholic perspective, because you said you went to the Catholic Mass. I didn't know if that was kind of like what's going on in China, where there's like 3 Catholic churches, where one is like the government sanctioned Catholic church, and then like the underground one. But I don't know. I mean, are priests free to talk in their homilies, or they got to be careful, right?
Well, I mean, they
always got to be careful in Cuba.
You can't talk against the government, okay? All right. And besides, I mean, priests are not really supposed to be political, correct? Right? But there's okay, but anyway, so no, they can't talk against the Cuban government. But I attended mass in a little neighborhood parish chapel. There was actually a parish, and there was a priest, and he celebrated mass, and it was a little chapel. Actually, my grandfather helped build that chapel. And it was well attended. It was mostly ladies, by the way, but nevertheless, I don't know why the men stay away from the church, but that's another topic for another conversation for sure. So, but anyway, but the point is that we were able to attend the mass. It wasn't organized for our benefit. It was a mass that was already scheduled, and then we went and we attended. So that is that's a good sign,
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, and again, I thought that was surprising, but that is a good sign, right? That is a good sign. And then Jill, like, why, from your perspective, like, is this fight one that you want to take up? Because it's so incompatible and inconceivable with your own faith, right? With our own faith. Why is it something that, like, you're still praying on this now? I mean, how has this impacted, like, your own faith? How has this impacted your own faith in your own prayer life? Because I'm sure you're drained, and so thank you for giving that little bit at 7 a.m. Thank you, but like,
yeah. I mean, honestly, it's draining, but and there are days that I've taken a break off social media because it's a lot to take in. When it's like I found myself every day, it's like any downtime I had, I was like scrolling through like the hashtag, what's going on, and the horrific things that you see, and the emotion and combination with the emotional investment that you have in it can be very taxing, and has been very taxing. But as hard as it is for me, and as emotionally tolling as that is, for the people that have had 60 years of living through this, 62 years of living through this, is so much more, and now more than ever, they need our voices, because, they can't speak freely. The fact that, they were protesting for days is huge. And so that's a time that we really have to step up as Cuban Americans, as people, as humans, to speak for them is huge. For people to be aware of what's happening there is huge. And so it has been emptying. But that's been a place of prayer that you go, that you ask the Lord to sustain you. And the amount for all of the people that you get on social media that are speaking out of line and out of ignorance and maybe willfully ignorant, the amount of personal messages that I've gotten on social media from friends, from people that I haven't spoken to in a long time, saying that they've been praying for this situation for me, for my family, is really, I think, sustained me through this time. And
so with that, any other final thoughts, guys? I mean, thanks, Jill. Manuel, any other final thoughts as we?
Well, I kind of want to piggyback on that and to say that my impression sometimes, especially lately, is that Cuba and Haiti sort of share a similar, I think, a similar perspective among the American people, is that they look at what's going on in these two countries that are so near them, and they say, oh, isn't it awful what's happening down there? Oh, those poor people, and so on. But in reality, it's like, look at what's happened in Haiti. Haiti is the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, and really nothing has been seriously done to change the situation there, right? And I'm afraid that it's going to be the same thing with Cuba. They're going to say, oh, how awful. I hope those people, wind up, taking over their own country and blah, 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 and this and then so on. But I'm afraid that we just, maybe this will be a topic for like a follow-up session, Josh, who knows? But so what can be done? in Cuba? You know, what are the steps that can be done to improve the situation of the Cuban people? You know, there are some politicians that are saying that, well, that we need military intervention on the part of the United States. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I think it's actually a mixed, you know, it's a mixed thing, right? But you know, as I said, I don't think we have time to talk about all that.
That's true. It's a mixed bag, eh?
Do we have time to solve the world's problems, Josh?
Not well. I mean, not well. I want to be honest, to the point where we could, but that's something that, man, we could be here, you know. But
yeah,
it's a mixed bag because there's so much, you know. And we said it already. Like, okay, if USA does get involved and provides a military presence, what does that mean? That's letting everybody know. All right, we're hitching our wagon. All right, you're gonna come forward. Then it's gonna be like a gigantic, awful game of Risk. And people don't just lose friends on Risk, you know, you're going to lose lives. And it's just sick bag.
I think there's, there are things that can be done though, which is amplifying, I think, Cuban voices and, you know, is huge. When you talk about, you know, people getting educated or things like that about the situation and kind of after praying for the situation, right. That you know, you also have to look at it with a lens of, for, you know, a very long time, you know, the government has controlled what has come out of Cuba. Mm-hmm. They know who's coming onto the island. They know what, you know, they're reporting. They know, you know, whether they are sympathizers or not. And so you have to look at everything that's put out about Cuba. You have to look at it with the lens of that. Of Fidel was never going to let anything come out about Cuba that would look bad and badly reflect on him, you know, or the country, you know. And so you have to look at it with that lens. And so I think a big way that you can do that is to find the Cubans that are in, you know, and we're everywhere, you know. We're not just in Miami. We're not just, you know, in New York. You know, you have to talk to Cubans with skin in the game, which is why I really appreciate. And, you know, I was absolutely going to say yes to the invitation to come on here, because we as Cubans also need to share this. Right. And I think one of the frustrations of what, kind of to echo of what Manuel was saying, is like, you know, we don't want this to just be, you know, great, I hope these people figure it out. And my fear, even though I think that the embargo has failed, my fear is that it's like, if that's what we're fighting for, right, for the embargo to end, then it's like, cool, we did our thing, now we can move on to the next thing. And there's so much more work to do beyond that, because the problem is much bigger than the embargo. And so it's like, yes, where do we, you know, like, what are those other things, you know, that we're looking for, that we're willing to fight for, and how can we make this a longer sustainable cause, you know, and not just say, cool, we did this, we fought for, you know, because sometimes we do that. Right. You know, we fight for frivolous things to change, and then nothing actually changes.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a huge gaping wound, you know?
Yeah.
You have the worst.
I think, speaking of Band-Aids and wounds, I think probably the most immediate thing that has to be done is to put needles into Cuban arms right now, you know, and to do it in a way that that is verifiable. You know, Biden actually suggested, you know, getting a third party, like a peacekeeping force or something that will oversee the vaccination of Cubans, so that these vaccinations don't basically go into the black market, which is probably what would happen, you know. And I think that's the first thing that has to happen. I think we have to save lives, you know.
I would say that's the most immediate thing to, like, solve, like, what broke the camel's back for that second, right, is address this immediate issue. Like, what's first? Okay, people are dying. Right. Let's get them COVID vaccinated, and let's do it under a third party if we have to, because we can't trust it. We can't trust that those vaccines are going to get to the people, right?
Right.
That are going to get to the people that have been out there protesting. We have that factor as well. That, I mean, that's something that the government does, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
You speak out against the government, you're punished. Now you don't get a vaccine.
Oh yeah.
You know,
And
your
they know,
family doesn't.
and they know who you are, you know, because like on every block, there's an informant, you know. There are eyes and ears everywhere. That's another way of controlling the population. It's not just the control of the information, but it's actually, you know, so that people, you know, it's like Big Brother, you know, they're watched all the time. So you have to be careful of what you say. So if you were out there protesting, that's right. You're probably going to be the last person to get those vaccines if they do.
Yeah, if they do let you.
Right.
And if, you know, if the Cuban government takes the vaccines as well, because that's, I mean, misconceptions going out about it. You know, the Cuban government said we don't want to take we don't want the vaccines. We want to develop our own vaccines, and that's also part of why. It's not that America didn't want to give them or sell them vaccines. So.
Well, you know, I don't know how much time we have left, but I just wanted to go back briefly to the issue about Jill. You were talking about how Cuba is touted by the rest of the communist world as being like the paragon of socialized medicine, right? You know, I talked to enough people when I was there to understand that yes, that you know that you can have, you know, an operation and it won't cost you anything. The problem is that you're going to have to wait for it because they don't have the thread to sew you up with after you're operated on. You know, they don't have the materials.
Yeah, I mean, you go to the hospital there, you have to take your sheets, you have to take your pillow. Like, you're lucky if you get a mattress when you go to the hospital.
Right.
You know, Cubans living in Cuba are calling their families in America, sending them Advil, Tylenol. Like, I mean, and that's very different than the government hospitals, right? Like, you have the hospitals for the common people, and then you have the hospitals for the people that work for the dictatorship. And those are two very different things as well. And we talk about, you know, you see information come out about Cuba, you know, sends out doctors. Yeah, they send out doctors to all these countries for missionary work, right? But I mean, they're sent out. The money that they get paid goes paid to the Cuban government. If they decide not to, then the Cuban government revokes their qualifications, right? Their certifications as doctors. So, I mean, there's a lot of complexities here that, I mean, it's hard for us to wrap our head around.
Here's my question for the both of you. Is there still like a wall that like gets out, like in terms of internet? Like, are they like really screwed in terms of getting information out? Because we do see the videos that pop up on social media, but how does that get out, Joe? I know you had mentioned it that didn't, like, the internet out there. What's going on there in that way?
Yeah. So one of the big things that we've been asking for is for the U.S. to get internet access to the people, because right, the government's been cutting internet. Right at 7:00 at night when the sun goes down, the government cuts off all power to the island, anyways. Right. Like, the people, it goes dark, you know. But they've been cutting internet, and so a big thing that we've been advocating for, right, is we have the technology to put satellites up, or, you know, to get the people internet, which means that the government can't control that, which means that we can actually find out what's happening on the island, right? A lot of the videos that we've seen are either people using a VPN that has been charged up, you know, on their phone by relatives, and there's been some organizations that have been doing that have been taking donations to do that for people, or that was leaked before all the blackouts. And so, you know, a lot of it is, you know, I think a lot of what we can start doing in a big first step is being able to make that available so that people can speak for themselves, right? Like, and it's not just, it can't be used as a political gain of, you know, like, you know, all these people saying that, you know, it's government, but it's not, it's America, it's all these things. Like, let's just actually hear what's coming from the people and amplify those voices, you know.
Yeah, Andrea Mitchell just interviewed the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the United States, and he said basically that everything the Americans are saying is an absolute lie, that none of it is true. You know, so it's like, okay, so then people that don't know, right, that have they're not Cuban American, they don't have any connection to, you know, to people that are there or anything like that, have not been there, have not seen anything. So they're, you know, the rest of the people, they're looking and they say, well, who do we believe? You know, Do we believe what our government is saying, or do we believe, because they tell you with absolute sincerity that none of these things, that no one is getting killed, no one is getting arrested, no one is disappearing, that this is all American propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, they've said that one person has died. How many videos have come out of people being killed? You know, like, I mean, if that doesn't tell you anything, I'm not really sure.
And taking the boys, right, and putting them into the military and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in Cuba, you have to do forced military service. You know,
Absolutely.
But
all right, guys, and we can keep, and we could go, and we can go.
Yes, we can.
Yay!
Breakfast and second breakfast with Jill. We can keep going. We can get up, you know, la ropa vieja. We can start eating. We can do a lot of things. But
my favorite.
We cannot. But I would love it. But maybe that's another time, in a lighter time. But I got to get to mass. But and pray for you, y'all, guys. Thank you again for the time. But real quick hitters, something for the people, something that they can come away with, or action items that they can do. If there are any academic resources or anything they can read or watch safely, what do you guys got? Something quick, or just like a thank you for having me, goodbye. Like, what do you guys got, Jill?
There's some great social media platforms out there right now. I think one of the frustrations, I mean, it's good because, you know, Spanish is the language of our people, but there's not a lot of things that are coming out in English.
No.
So it's really hard for people who don't speak Spanish.
Right.
So Cuba AMP is a great, they're translating videos that are being put out so that into English, from Spanish to English, which is great. There's a guy on social media called Hidalgo Rob. And you can look, he does a lot of fact-based things. He's a really smart guy. I think he might be a professor of sorts as well, but he does a lot of fact-based of what is happening in Cuba. He doesn't put out, you know, he likes to say, I don't put out opinion videos. I just try to stick to the facts, which has been really, really educational, even for the likes of me. And just, you know, SOS Cuba, you know, America Valdez has been great. She's been putting out some great stuff. A young Cuban voice, especially, you know, there's like Manuel was saying, a lot of Cubans are people of color, Black, you know, people of color. And so that's really, really important as well that we look at, because sometimes they're the most marginalized people on the island. So, yeah. But all in all, I really appreciate the time to be able to share and to speak on it, and to hopefully, be a little bit of an inspiration for people to go out there and to share as well. And
Definitely. Thank you, Joe. Manuel, how about you?
Well, I mean, I would say, you know, you might want to check out what non-American news sources are saying about this. You know, what are the Europeans saying about all this stuff? What's their perspective, right? I think it's good to get some independent perspective on it. You know, not just so not just, you know, American-based perspective.
There it is. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been rocking with the best, the Holy Ruckus Podcast. Thanks so much for being with us, whether you are listening to us or watching us on YouTube or Facebook. Thanks so much for being with us. Go ahead, share, comment, like, let us know if you have any questions for our folks. I mean, the podcast is over, but you can definitely let us know in the comments, and I will relay these back to them. This won't be the last time that we'll have them, because I think this is going to be something that we're going to touch on again, because it matters to us as society, it matters to us as Americans, but also as a multi-layered Catholic church. So thanks so much for rocking with us. My guest, thank you so much for your time. God bless you, and we will see you all at another time. Thanks so much, and please pray for Cuba and the rest of the world. My guests, stay tuned real quick, stay on. But for everybody else, thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe at the Holy Ruckus. Thanks so much.